I had a lot of fun in pulling together the content and filming the videos for this course. What I thought we could do is just spend a few minutes looking over what modules we have and the content of those modules. So let's jump into it. We're going to kick this course off going over what storage devices look like. We'll talk about a few different aspects when it comes to the storage devices. We'll talk about the characteristics, media that it actually goes on, where the bits are saved into. We'll talk about different components of a computer. We're going to talk about form factors, and we'll talk about protocols and interfaces. And although we have a whole module designed for media, we'll do a general overview of the different types of media that we commonly use for computers, whether it's paper, optical, magnetic, or a solid state. From a component standpoint, we'll talk about how those different components help run your computer. We're not going to take a real in-depth look into this, but making sure that we have an understanding of those different components of the computer. We're also going to take a deeper dive into hard disk drives and solid state drives, just to see what those two look like. Then we're going to take a deeper dive into storage media. This is where we're going to learn some details about those different storage medias and how your computer reads data from them. And even though this is still going to be a high-level overview of what these different media is, we are going to take a look at what's actually happening where we are storing those bits. So for instance, magnetic media, we're going to take a look at the hardware that stores those bits and how it actually stores the bits on this magnetic media. I find this part really fascinating when we get down to this granular level of how we actually read the bits off of things like CDs and DVDs. And we'll certainly cover solid state storage because that's primarily what we're buying and using nowadays. But these devices don't typically manage themselves. So what we need to do is we need to have an operating system that helps manage these devices. So next we're going to start talking about how do we utilize these using storage devices. Here we're going to get into the role of the operating system and how the operating system is used to prepare these devices so that way we can write to these devices, and how it reads and writes from these devices, and how it presents information from these devices and also protects them. And we'll get into how we break up these devices into little blocks of information, and then how we store references to that information so we can find files on these devices. We'll also get into how we can split up these devices into partitions and volumes so we can better utilize the space on these devices. Of course, most of that stuff happens on the back end, and some of it we're not even aware of. So let's start talking about files and file attributes, those things of how those files are being presented to us and some changes we can make on those files as users. So we're going to get into metadata. That is data about data. There are times when we want to know data about our data. For instance, where did we take a picture from? We'll also get into these different attributes and how we can turn those attributes on and off. And we'll get into things like extensions and how your computer knows what program to use to open up a file. Keeping data safe has become very critical in today's age. So then we're going to get into how do we keep our data safe and how does your operating system keep your data safe? But what is safety anyways? So then we're going to get into the CIA triad and talk about how your computer keeps things confidential, keeps integrity, and keeps things available. We'll get into things like file permissions, both from a Linux perspective and from a Windows perspective. We'll talk about ways that we can protect our data, such as encryption. And we'll get into what redundancy is and how we have redundancy so that way we can keep our data up and available. And the different types of backups that we can use to help keep our data safe in case something becomes corrupted and we need to do a restore. We'll get into a few details like what RAID is and introduce RAID and how we can duplicate the data that's stored on these different devices. And what we may want to do is we may want to be able to access our data from different devices. So then we're going to get into accessing data. We're going to go over how you could use your computer to share out information and files and folders with other devices on your network. We'll also learn what a file server is, what a network attached storage is, what the cloud storage looks like, so that way we can share out our files and folders with other devices or other people. We're even going to take a glimpse on what a database is and how a database differs from other ways that we share out files and folders. In the end, you're going to have this great foundation of computer storage devices and how these different devices are used on your computer.